the area here, and we're going to have a very interesting panel discussion today entitled Coping with the New Landscape of FDA Regulations, the Patient-Centric Viewpoint. I want to open up the discussion for just a couple of minutes, kind of hoping to frame the problem for you and having you understand the scope of the problems, and then we're going to have some wonderful additional comments. The landscape is changing in terms of the ability for new medical devices to be approved here in the United States. And it is a problem of increasing concern, the magnitude of which people outside of the field and industry really don't fully appreciate. In the early 1970s, there were, over a period of time, some major fiascos that occurred with healthcare, with both pharmaceuticals and with devices. The biggest initial problem was the thalidomide fiasco that happened in the early 60s, where patients were taking an anti-nausea drug, and as a result of that, when they were pregnant, and many babies were born that were deformed without limbs, and it was just an absolute fiasco, much worse in Europe than it was in the United States. But that really sort of focused the interest of the United States and in the FDA in looking at the safety of pharmaceutical devices. Similarly, there were two very large problems in the mid-'70s and late '70s, one with IUD implants that caused a catastrophic problem in women, and the second, the Bjork-Shiley valve, which was a prosthetic aortic valve. And I was actively involved in doing the research and trying to detect methods of figuring out how this valve had a difficult problem. The Bjork-Shiley valve was a valve that was put in the aortic valve and the mitral valve. Incredibly successful, unbelievably durable, fantastic hemodynamics. But the problem is, for reasons that people couldn't understand or anticipate, very rarely the struts that were holding the valve in place would break, the valve would embolize, and then there would be catastrophic aortic insufficiency or mitral insufficiency, which was really lethal within a few minutes. More than 400,000 of these devices were implanted worldwide, and many of these patients had to have the valves taken out because of worry. And so this really created a huge problem that ultimately caused Pfizer to have a huge settlement to try to get these patients fixed and resolved. So there was a concern that by the public and by the regulators that we were approving unsafe medical devices. And as a result of that, the regulations really became more and more constrictive. The problem that I have is that the current FDA regulations are not really addressing the issue, which is how can you really take a look at the safety of devices. If the current restrictive trials would have been done, for instance, with the Bjork-Shiley valve, the 1 out of 1,000 chance that this valve could have a difficulty would never be caught, because the main safety problems with these devices occur very infrequently. And with the current FDA regulations for approval of devices, the numbers of devices that would be in a clinical trial would never really be able to detect these very infrequent problems. And even more importantly, are these infrequent problems more or less than the previous existing product or technique for fixing this particular problem? So I think that we really have a major problem, because the regulations are becoming more and more onerous. It's more and more difficult to get products approved. And yet what we're not doing is we're not fixing the problem, which is really trying to figure out when rare and infrequent complications of medical devices are going to happen, how frequently are they going to happen, and are they worse than the previous generation of products that were used for that particular indication. So I think that we really have a great problem. And the difficulty that we have, and we'll hear more from the panel, is that we're not sort of functioning in a flat earth. The regulation is strictly a U.S. FDA for medical devices. The Europeans have a very different process, and many of the other places in the world have entirely different. And we really truly are, perhaps with Japan as an exclusion, the most restrictive and risk-adverse regulatory climate that exists on the planet. As a result of that, American patients are not going to have access to safe and effective medical devices for the next generation. And I can tell you, as a practicing interventional cardiologist, it becomes incredibly frustrating to have devices that are conceived, designed, and manufactured in the United States be shipped over to Europe and South America for clinical use. And currently, we have a program at the Miller School of Medicine with a collaboration with a hospital in Cali, Colombia, where we're actually taking patients that need new percutaneous valves that cannot have those available in the United States, and they're actually going to South America. Many patients are going to Europe for medical products and medical procedures, and many patients are going to be going to India and to Thailand. So I have a very, very strong concern that what's going to happen if the current road continues is that the United States is actually going to become a third or a fourth world as far as medical care, because the advanced products that are available in Europe and in Asia are going to far surpass the medical care that we have available in the United States. Now, the rich people can get this. A Hollywood producer's mother had a valve problem, couldn't get it done in the United States. He flew her by private jet over to Germany to have it implanted. They easily paid for it, but regular old Americans, certainly none of the Medicare recipients that I know, are going to have the money to be able to do that. So I think all of you really have to be aware that the problems that are developing are going to lead to consequences which are going to impact the patient care and the delivery of the most advanced technology that we have to offer. Americans have prided themselves, and I think with a great deal of pride, at having the most sophisticated and most advanced medical care on the planet. But I can tell you that from my perspective, that is really at risk right now, and I think that we really are at risk of becoming a second or a third world as far as medical technology and medical devices. So with those kind of unfortunate opening comments, I'll turn it over to Dr. Stack, and maybe at the end we can talk about what potential solutions could exist after we hear from our panelists.